Yeah, here, what I'll talk about today, basically three things, I guess. Kind of wrap up the season, go back over the season. I'll talk about recruiting a little bit because now we're kind of heading into that part of the season, that part of the schedule. I usually don't follow it very close, but I did do some research this morning. And then we'll talk about Georgia a little bit. It's probably getting to the point now where we should talk about the opponent in the bowl game. So we'll do that. And I was telling Carl too, I have reading glasses and I forgot them. So some of this information, well, you know, I do wear my wife sometimes in public, restaurants usually, and booths.
I have 12 pairs back here.
No, I'm okay. I think I appreciate that though. I think I can get through it. Yeah, before the season, I talked to a lot of groups like this, and I guess in August and September, one of the things I said I'd really like to see this year is it's not such a wild ride, you know, things a little more smooth and consistent. So much for that.
Yeah.
Maybe we get that next year. Yeah, this was about as wild a season as we've seen. And you know, it's been interesting. I mean, the good thing is there's a lot to talk about always. That's one good thing about Bo's teams. He gives you a lot. And I think when you do what I do, I just try to reconcile the fact they won 10 games and won 7 in the league with the fact that the losses were they're bad losses. I mean, 2 blowouts, and then of course the game at UCLA, which wasn't a blowout. I mean, Nebraska with 9 minutes left had a great chance to win that game, and you know they had the ball late and had a good chance despite giving up 653 yards. I know, 653. Yeah, there's 3 numbers I'll always remember from this year. There's 653, 8, which is the yards per play at Ohio State. Ohio State got 8 yards per play, and then 10.7, which is what I can't even say it without chuckling. Was Wisconsin got 10.7 per play, which is an enormous number, and I never thought I'd see it at Nebraska. So I don't, you know, and to this day, I don't know how to exactly look at things because I did see a lot of progress this year. I mean, you have to remember that. I think it's easy, and you know, it's human nature, I think, a little bit to dwell on the negative. I think we all tend to do that to a certain degree instead of emphasizing the positive. And that Wisconsin game, the last Wisconsin game, it kind of skews what they did. And I know that's going to be frustrating for the staff as we go forward, but it is what it is, as Bill likes to say. And I still believe that they are making progress as a program. I just don't think you can win 6 games against those teams, the meat of their schedule, without being well prepared, without being a disciplined team. I think it takes a lot to, for instance, execute that 2-minute drill and do it pretty flawlessly like they were able to do a few times. To execute at that high a level with that much pressure, and there was a lot. I mean, there was a lot because Bo put it on after that Ohio State game. So, and then also the defense had to rise up in those games. So you can't. I'm not going to forget those things. And you know, the Wisconsin game, different people look at it a lot different ways. People that aren't from here tend to look at it as, well, it was a loss. You know, you lose by 4, you lose by 44. It's all the same thing. And I know a lot of athletes look at it like that. I don't think as fans we look at it like that. But I know there are some athletes that do. And that game obviously got away from them, as did the Ohio State game. And I think that's what they have to look at now is what happened? Why aren't we able to keep those things under control? How does it get so out of control? And I think they'll look at that after the season. During the season, they don't really have a lot of. They don't have any time really for that kind of introspection because they're moving on to the next game so quickly, and they got to get everybody on the same page for that they just don't have time to mold that stuff. And I bet you Bo hasn't thought too much about it at this point even. But they'll start that in the off season, and we'll see what kind of adjustments he makes. I don't know that there'll be any. You know what? I don't know if he'll change anything on his coaching staff. Now, that might change. I don't know what will happen after the bowl game. If the bowl game, if they lose in a bad manner, maybe he would have to do something. But I just don't see where he'd make the move. In my opinion, I can't see him firing anybody on offense or making any major moves on offense because they're a top 25 offense that's made a ton of progress. They're 66th nationally in total offense last year. They're 24th this year, and they've been pretty good. I don't know where you make the change. I hear Barney Cotton come up a lot. Fans will say, hey, maybe they should get Barney out of there. But I know this. Bo thinks a lot of Barney. So I'd just be, and Bo's not going to do anything because of public sentiment. There's not going to be public pressure that affects him. As you probably figured out, he's not really cut out that way. So I don't know what you do on offense and on defense. I told Bo the other day, and he didn't laugh. I said, I think the only move you can make there is to fire yourself. You didn't like that. But I don't, and I was being facetious mostly. But it's the same thing. You can't, if you just go down the list, they have the #1 pass defense in the country, or they did. And I can't see, so they're in the top 5. So the secondary coach, you don't make a move there, he's new. The defensive line coach is new. I don't think you can hang anything on him. John Papuchis is very close to Bo. And it's, John is the defensive coordinator, and he has a lot of input and say on the sideline, but Bo swings the final hand on defense. It's Bo's defense, and the coaches will make that very clear to you. They work under Bo and at Bo's behest. So, the defensive issues are Bo's issues. So, he's got to get that figured out. But I know this. I was talking to Carl was asking about, inevitably this time of year, the talk about Bo looking at other jobs, other people coming after him arises. And I'll say this about the defense and his feeling about it. He thinks he was very optimistic. I talked to him Monday night. And all he talked about was next year in the bowl game and how optimistic he was about the defense. And I know he was being genuine. It wasn't a for publication thing. And I wouldn't say everything that he said, but the nature of the conversation was he was very upbeat about the young guys on defense in the program. Maybe some guys you haven't heard of, although Nebraska fans know the roster about as well, better than I do, which is sometimes awkward. But he mentioned Vincent Valentine's a defensive tackle, redshirted. Kevin McMullen is a defensive tackle, redshirted. Avery Moss didn't redshirt, played a little bit this year, but is a freshman. These are all freshmen. And then Thomas Brown Bo said he's their best pass rusher in the system right now, but he's a freshman, and they thought about playing him early in the season, then he got hurt. They were going to pull his red shirt, and then he had an injury that just kept him from doing it. But he's had a great year on the scout team. Bo says they can't block him. So there are guys, and then there's a guy, an Auburn transfer, a cornerback, whose name I can't say right now. But Bo says he'll be our best defensive back next year. So I know within the system there's no panic. that he feels good about it. And I can tell you, as far as the job stuff goes, you know, a couple of people asked me last week, boy, it must be a rough week because you're trailing all these job rumors about Bo. And I said, no, I mean, I'm not trailing hardly anything, because he told me, not this Monday, but a week ago Monday, he said there's nothing going on with Tennessee. And those rumors, it's a bizarre thing. Now, I'm lucky a little bit because I'm privy. I mean, Bo's pretty straight with me on this stuff. And at that point, I just said, he's not going anywhere. I don't care what I read on the internet or even in the newspaper, because this stuff does make its way into the newspaper. But this was an example of a year where I wasn't worried about it at all. Now, are there any jobs open out there right now? Because I don't want to be proven wrong tomorrow. But I don't think there's Wisconsin. I don't think he's going to Wisconsin. So that I don't know that they'd want him right now. I'm trying to think how they sell that. It's all about the spin. So we'll talk a little bit about recruiting, and it is pretty important right now. Defensive line is the main area where, I mean, it's pretty universally agreed upon that they have to come up pretty big. They have to. Yeah, it is the defensive line. You saw what I saw, didn't you? They got to get some immediate help, probably. I mean, I don't think it's a make or break deal, but it would help to get a junior college defensive tackle that can play next year for depth reasons, or if he's good enough to play. Usually you bring in JUCOs to play right away, or at least contribute right away. So they do have, you know what, by the end of the month, we'll know a lot about this recruiting class. We'll have a pretty good idea if it's going to be a good one or a bad one. It won't be done at the end of December, but there's 6 or 7 guys right now that will decide by the end of the month. 3 of them are three of them actually are defensive tackles, and 2 of those guys are JUCO, junior college defensive tackles. One's name is Levon Hooks, the other's name is Quincy Russell, and then there's a guy out in California named Kevin Pico, and then there's also a high school defensive tackle named Maylee Collins. So they're emphasizing that, and they would take 3 defensive tackles in this class. Probably wouldn't get 3 because, those defensive tackles are going to look at it and say, why they recruit 3? We're not all going to play, so maybe one of us should go somewhere else. But it looks like they could easily get 2, and that's what they're gunning for. And they need ends too, defensive ends, and that's an emphasis. And I think personally they need to get a few offensive line tackles. They're a little short up front on offense too. And I think it starts, I always believe you build, and I'm just talking about stuff I've heard from guys who know over the years, that you build a team from the inside out, that you get a good center, that you have a good quarterback, you have a good running back. And if you start there and build out, you're probably in good shape. And it's the same thing on defense. Get a good nose tackle, good guys inside, good middle linebacker and a safety, and you can be in pretty good shape. So that's what we're looking at recruiting wise. As far as Georgia goes, now I know a lot of people looked at it and said, Nebraska doesn't have a chance to win this game. I wouldn't go that far. I think Georgia is obviously more talented, and Bo will say that, I think, publicly. They do have more talent overall. That's the bad news. The good news is they are pretty basic, so they're easy to prepare for, and that does make a difference. Their offense isn't crazy. Nebraska won't have to spend a lot of time learning a lot of stuff about shifts like you saw Wisconsin. They did all those crazy pre-snap shifts. It actually does take some time to get a handle on for the kids. But this offense won't be that way. Now Georgia, they're 11-2, and I think if you just look at their season, you know, on the surface, to me it looks like they struggled in late September and October. You know, they didn't struggle badly. They're 11-2, but Tennessee played them, just put 44 on them in Athens, Georgia. Now, Georgia scored 51, so they got out of it. But, you know, Tennessee getting 44 on their defense indicates that they're a little vulnerable. The next week, they went to South Carolina and got drilled, 35-7, and they got down 21-7 early, or 21-0 early, and never were in the game. The next week after that, they went to Kentucky and only won by 5. So I don't fall into that. Nebraska has no shot of winning this game. Georgia's, you know, one of the best teams of all time. They're not. They're very good, and you know, they played really well down the stretch. So after those 3 games, they went to Florida and won. They won in Gainesville, and they held Florida to 9 points. So they obviously got things going there. So and from there, they've played really well. So I think they kind of turned their season around in Gainesville and haven't had much trouble with anybody since then, except losing to Alabama in that close game in the SEC championship game. So, and now how will they come in mentally? I don't know. I mean, that's the one factor you don't know. Well, Georgia, they had such a massive letdown to lose that game to Alabama in the final seconds. And then the team they beat, Florida, goes to the Sugar Bowl. Now, Georgia may not come in a great mindset. Now, Nebraska's going to deal with that too, though. So, a lot of it, I think, that stuff is hard to measure, but it's really important. The psychological part. I used to dismiss that, but those college kids, sometimes you just don't know, you know, how they're going to show up. Georgia, what you'll notice about them is that on offense is they're really balanced, and that's going to make it difficult. They run well and they pass well, and it's very simple. You guys have watched football. If you're able to do both those things well, it makes things pretty tough, and they do them really well. They have one of the nation's top-ranked passers in Aaron Murray, Jr., who's about he's the most efficient quarterback in the country. And then they have 2 really good big running backs, freshmen, both from North Carolina, and they're both good. They're young, but they're big. You know, one's 6 foot, 218, the other's 5'11", 218. So they're big, strong guys, and they'll make it tough for Nebraska. Their offense is ranked 27th, as is their defense. So they're top 30 defense and offense. I mean, nothing crazy, but they're solid. And they do have one of the best players you'll see this season on defense. His name is Jarvis Jones. You'll know his name by the end of the game. Number 29 is an outside linebacker who will be really difficult to deal with. He has 26 tackles behind the line of scrimmage, which is an enormous amount. Think about that. And 12.5 sacks. So number 29 will be in the backfield a lot. You know, he's going to be there. You just got to hope that maybe you're on the other side or something. But yeah, he's one of the best players I've seen this year. So remember Jarvis Jones, number 29. And they got a good safety, number 36, Sean Williams. He's their second leading tackler. So that's kind of the rundown on Georgia. I think it could be a decent game if Nebraska, you know, what I would say is, I thought, you know, a lot of people thought that South Carolina's talent would be too much for Nebraska in last year's bowl game, but I didn't see a big talent differential in that game. Nebraska lost that game because it melted down, you know, and that game should have been much closer. So I think that game gives you a little hope because South Carolina is really talented. They beat Georgia 35-7. That team, and I watched South Carolina almost beat LSU this year, and it's a lot of the same guys. So Nebraska can go in there and catch Georgia, and maybe we'll look at that Wisconsin game a lot different after that. So we got a few minutes for questions, and I'm willing to take about anything, I think. Yes, sir.
Baker's time didn't play against Wisconsin. Was that the difference?
Baker Steinkuhler, was injured in the last game against Wisconsin. Was that the difference? You know what? It really hurt. It did in a lot of ways. In fact, when he went down against Iowa, the first thing I thought about was Wisconsin's offensive line. I mean, they're not great. Wisconsin's not a great offensive line. They often are. They're very good, though, and they got good as the season progressed. So they were playing pretty well when Nebraska faced them. And Nebraska's really, that's why I talked about recruiting D-line. That hurt them bad. Baker had a good year. Kind of quietly. But
the first time we played, we had a very good game.
Yeah, it's probably Baker's best game.
Yeah.
Baker played probably his best game against Wisconsin, his second best game against Michigan. So, yeah, trust me, that was an area I'm sure Wisconsin tried to exploit. And you'd say, well, they hurt Nebraska on the perimeter, which is true. I mean, they started out on the perimeter, and Mo's guess was they were very surprised at how easy they were getting those yards on the perimeter. He thinks probably they started that way, thinking we're not going to get much, we're going to show it to them, and then we're going to run inside because Nebraska's hurt up front. Well, it turns out Wisconsin was getting cornered too. I mean, they were getting guys on the edge and doing a lot of damage there. So, and in fact, when I saw how much Wisconsin had going out there on the perimeter, those they call them jet sweeps, where the guy runs around and kept running downfield in this case. I knew when they were getting those, there was going to be a problem because I figured they'd be able to run inside too. So what happens? They get those plays on the perimeter. You saw Nebraska's splits get wider and wider, and then Wisconsin just booms it in the middle, between those gaps. And Nebraska didn't have the talent up front to handle it. Playing Cameron Meredith. For instance, I was talking to, what I usually do is call guys who know stuff and then act like I know. Dave Remington, I was talking to Dave, and I'm not dropping a name, I'm writing about the Remington Trophy. But he said that he couldn't believe that they're using Cameron Meredith inside, as an interior defensive lineman. Cameron's about 255. It's the best they got. And to play that against Wisconsin, think about it, on those plays where he's getting doubled, that's 670 pounds on him, and that's not a 255 pounder, doesn't even belong in there. And so Nebraska, that was going to be a tough matchup. And Baker, you're right, Baker not being there hurt in that. Yes, sir.
I think in this day of age, and even what you're writing, is that on any given game, anybody can beat anybody else because they're getting more and more balanced. And I think a beautiful example this year was watching Baylor against Kansas State.
Yes.
Kansas State just could not do anything against that team. Not atypical Nebraska studies.
Right. See, I'm glad you said that. You're right, and I think a lot, and me included, we grew up and we watched Nebraska football all those years where they would dominate teams, and they would never lose like they're losing now. And I'm not excusing it at all because I do think it's kind of bizarre, but it has changed dramatically since the 80s and even the early 90s. It is, you see now, week to week, pretty much week to week, especially in the Big Ten, where every game's difficult now. I mean, there's really nothing, there's no week where you can say, we're going to win by 4 touchdowns. And maybe we'll get that a little bit when Indiana and Purdue come on the schedule, but I wouldn't say a lot. Those teams are all right. Even Minnesota, I watched Minnesota early in the season and thought, you know what? My thought was Minnesota's talent on defense may be better than Nebraska's. And that told me a lot. Now, their defense was playing well early. They were young. and they started fading off late in the season. Minnesota did, but that you look at just their athleticism and size, it's probably better than Nebraska's. So, in my position, I'm not surprised week to week at all, because I see the talent level, and Nebraska's not above it. In fact, I was really impressed this year that they were able to beat some teams like Michigan, even Penn State, because I thought, and more importantly, I'll tell you, I guess you bring me here to give you some insight. Bo, I know, was scared to death of Penn State. Their talent, their size, and I could see it. I mean, the first 5 plays, I thought, you know what, they're probably better than Nebraska. I mean, their talent, they're good. They were good. And they would have been really good if they had the guys that didn't transfer out. They had a great receiver transfer out, a great running back transfer out, kicker. Not having their kicker hurt them bad. They would have been a top 10 team. And as it was, they were darn near a top 25 team. But so I was, I look at things a little different because I wasn't real confident Nebraska would win those types of games. So it all kind of depends on how you look at things sometimes. And I thought those wins were really good. Yes, sir.
I grew up in Alabama. I was 10 when they hired Bear Bryant.
Yes.
And I was thinking that day that Alabama and Georgia played, and then after the bowl selection, if the guy hadn't tripped over the 5-yard line, Georgia and the Husker would be playing Alabama. I think they're ought to be happy to play Georgia.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I don't know if Nebraska's ready for Alabama.
Quick question. Is this number 4 for Wisconsin? Aberderis, is he graduating?
Jared Aberderis of Wisconsin is a senior. I'm 95% sure. He's either a junior or a senior, which doesn't help you. But I think he's a senior. You like him?
He's killed.
Yeah, that play action. He's really good. He disguises things well. You don't know if he's staying to run block or if he's going out for a pass, and that's what it's all about in play action. So, yeah, he's been a handful. Yes, sir.
In your opinion, how much did Tom Osborne's stabilizing influence help this program in the last 3 or 4 years, and what do you predict for the next year?
Wow, that's a good question. That is, and I haven't. Nobody's asked me that. Oh, I think he's been very much a stabilizing force. In fact, I hate to think what Bo would be like if Tom was a joke. Now that you mention it, yeah, Sean Eichler's guy. That's definitely helped. I mean, not just the football team, obviously, but the entire athletic department. And it's one of those things where we may not even appreciate it. It's one of those things where you may not appreciate it until appreciating more down the line. I think a lot of people do appreciate what Tom's done now, but I think we'll appreciate it more down the line. And there's no question that he brings that calm. And with things being as rocky as they have, that is really important. And we'll see how Sean Eichhorst handles it. It'll be interesting, and I think he'll fit here because he's very much a behind-the-scenes guy, low profile, and I think he's not a flamboyant. He's very solid. I think that that'll be a good. I think there'll be good chemistry with he and Bo. All right, ooh, people got to get to work now. Yes, sir. One more.
2 games, I guess. Jonathan Cook, what's his status after the rival comment? And then
Jonathan Cook. Fill me in.
Quarterback recruit out of Alabama. I guess I read a quote on Rivals. He said, I guess he's still looking at his options. He said, I'd rather play in the SEC. That's what Hartman's athletes are.
Yeah, Jonathan Cook, I wouldn't count on.
Okay.
I wouldn't count on Nebraska getting him.
And then Stanley John Baptiste.
Yes.
Is he going to play in the bowl?
As far as I know, unless you know something I don't.
Well, I've heard from a couple of my really reliable college contacts that I guess he was having some academic problems.
Well, here's the deal. We haven't had the media hasn't talked to. We haven't been at practice for since the loss, but we do have access on Friday, and Bo will be available, so we can ask him about that. But hey, listen, it's real nice talking to you guys. If you didn't like it, Carl's the guy.